Hi, sixth period. Chapter 44 is called Flight. Um, okay, so Molly was trying to convince Master Windsor to leave. They all needed to leave the house. Molly opened the door to Penny's bedroom. Are you finished, miss? Finished? I've only just started. Penny sat on the floor of her room, an open suitcase before her. It was overflowing with stuffed animals and toys and blocks. She held up 2 dolls, one in each hand. I can't decide which one to keep. She looked between them and then threw them both on the floor, exasperated. Why are we even leaving? Your father thinks it's best, and I'm inclined to agree. Molly wandered through the room, collecting an assortment of clothes for the girl's journey, which she placed over one arm. She passed over the most beautiful dresses, instead taking clothes that could stand the most wear. She did not know where Master Windsor and his family would end up living, but it would likely be no place for frills. Molly knelt down next to Penny and began repacking the suitcase. But what if I don't want to leave? Penny asked. Molly removed most of the toys to make room for Penny's clothes. I thought you hated it here, miss. I do hate it, only there's some things I don't want to leave behind. Molly removed a stuffed bear to find a stack of Princess Penny books. The gilded pages shone bright even in the shadows. Things like these? The girl nodded. She touched the topmost book, picking at its corners. The cover was adorned with a bright picture of the princess battling an ogre who looked surprisingly like Alistair. Molly put a hand on the girl's shoulder, looking her straight in the eye. Miss Penny, there's better stories in the world than these. The girl looked like she might cry. Like your stories? Molly winked. On a good day. She gently removed the books from the suitcase and set them on the floor. Besides, the dolls might want something to read. She closed the case, latched it tight, and led Penny into the hall. The rest of the house was in a state of complete disarray. Since deciding to leave, Master Windsor had become a man of pure action, perhaps fearing that if he didn't leave quickly, he might lose his nerve. He had spent the last few hours rushing from room to room, collecting what essentials they might be able to fit on their carriage. A reluctant Alistair trailed behind him, helping when necessary. Molly went outside to check on her brother, who had been given a job of preparing the wagon for their journey. She found him in the drive, hoisting a large metal container onto the bed of the wagon. There were several other canisters, all of them different, some of which she recognized from the kitchen. What's all this? She said. Kip wiped his hands on his trousers. Lamp oil, axe grease, turpentine, lard, even a bit of brandy. You planning to cook something? Sort of. He steadied himself on the wagon, trying to keep off his bad leg. Molly looked around for his crutch, but once again could not see it. I know we can't hurt the tree, but I think we can make it harder to reach. If we take down the bridge, it'll be long before anyone comes near here again. The wood's too thick to cut it down, but I think there's a better way. He tapped a canister. Soon as we're across the bridge with the family, I'll pour every drop of oil on the beam and light the whole thing up. Molly looked at the rows of rusted canisters. You sure this isn't just about making a giant explosion? She said. Kip grinned. That too. By late afternoon, the family was packed and ready to go. Bags and trunks lined the foyer. The last step was Master Windsor. Constance had regained consciousness, but was still too weak to move on her own. Molly entered the bedroom with Master Windsor and Alistair to find Constance clutching her chest, panic on her face. Bertrand, she sat up. My ring! Master Windsor rushed to her, clutching her hand. No, my love, no more rings. He stroked her brittle hair. We're getting you out of here. We're going someplace safe. Molly saw Alistair out the corner of her eye. He was watching his parents, and his usually scornful look had given way to something more complicated. He bit the inside of his cheek as if calculating some difficult sum. Molly glanced out the window. The red sun hung just above the crest of the valley. She put a gentle hand on Bertrand's shoulder. It's nearly sundown. Master Windsor let go of his wife and stood. The bed frame was too wide to fit through the doorway, and so they decided to carry Mistress Windsor separately from her mattress, which would have to be turned on one side. He carefully lifted her into his arms, while Molly and Alistair dragged the heavy feathered mattress out into the hall. Master Windsor walked behind them, whispering to his wife as that one might whisper to a child. By the time they reached the foyer, she seemed to have fallen unconscious once more. Bertrand gingerly lowered her onto the mattress, which Molly and Alistair had placed in front of the stairs. Molly helped Bertrand wrap blankets around his wife's frame. If she doesn't make it, he said, touching her sleeping face. Molly heard the sound of the horse approaching on the drive. That'll be Kip with the wagon. Bertrand stood up, a suitcase in his hand. He lingered in the middle of the foyer, his eyes drifting from the walls to the windows to the ceiling. One final look at the house he had grown up in. I don't think I'll miss it, he said. You'd be surprised, Molly said, but then she added, that still don't mean you should stay. Bertrand walked to the front door, took the handle, and opened it. Evening, Governor. Bertrand let out a small shriek of alarm, dropping his suitcase. Do you have a prediction of who it is? It's not Kip at the door. Molly looked up to see two men propped against the doorway, one improbably tall, the other unusually squat, both reeking with the unmistakable odor of the city. Mr. Figg and Mr. Stubbs stepped into the house, eyeing the shocked family. Stubbs grinned. Going somewhere? Chapter 45 is Unwelcome Guests. Molly lay on the foyer floor. Hey, guys, push the door shut. Go push the door shut. Sorry. My kids are in here. Go push the door shut so I can hear. Let's see where I'm at. Molly lay on the foyer floor. Her feet and hands were tied with coarse rope, which cut like sandpaper against her skin. She struggled against the binds, trying to find a loose spot to slip her hand through, but none would reveal itself. The room around her was now a wasteland of overturned suitcases and torn curtains and broken furniture. Molly, I'm scared, said a voice in her ear. It was Penny, tied up like the rest of them. Her glasses had fallen off her face and were lying on the floor. Hush, love. Molly forced a smile. You'll be fine. A sort of cascading crash hit her ears. It sounded as if one of the men were pulling books down from the shelves in the study. Unlike on their previous visit, Figg and Stubbs had wasted no time with threats and ultimatums. They had tied up the family almost immediately and began ransacking the house. Sounds like they're having fun, Kip muttered from the other side. He had a fist tied to hide. He had, at first, tried to hide in the stables, but Figg had found him and put him next to Molly. This at least allowed them to talk openly without startling the others. We have to get out of here, Molly whispered, too quietly for Penny to hear. When the sun goes down, the night gardener will be here, and something tells me he'll still be angry. She craned her neck, looking through the open front door. The sun over the trees was a boiling red, the last gasps of daylight quickly draining from the sky. So much for our simple plan, Kip said. Figg and Stubbs wandered back into the foyer with a casual, almost friendly air. Long splinters and bits of cushion fluffs clung to their shabby coats. Figg had the Windsor portrait in his hand, holes punched into the canvas. Look at this, Stubbs. He pushed his head through a hole above Constance's body. Ain't I pretty? He said, making kissing sounds. Well, that does it for the study, Stubbs said, wiping his hands. Next stop, the bedrooms. He looked at Master Windsor, who had blood on his face from where they had struck him. Lest you just want to save us the trouble. I already told you I have nothing, Bertrand sputtered. Stubbs cocked his head to one side. And I told you a man don't leave this house without squirreling away a few earthly possessions. Figg pulled something from Constance's open trunk. How's these for earthly possessions? He waved a pair of stockings over his head. This wasn't our agreement, Bertrand said. You weren't supposed to be here until tomorrow. Well, that's the thing, Stubbs said, scratching his head. When you've been in this business long as me and Figg, you learn a few things, like how folks tend to disappear right when they're expecting you. So we like to pop in a day or two early. He propped a foot on one of the suitcases, which I think you'll agree was a wise precaution. The grandfather clock, which had been opened but not overturned, rang 7 times. Bertrand exchanged a look with Molly to show that he too understood the importance of getting out of the house before nightfall. He turned back to the men, putting on a smile that might have passed for charm in another circumstance. My good sirs, excuse me, I owe you both an apology. You've come all the way out here, and I've been incredibly rude. Take everything, furniture, clothes, the whole house, only please, let us go. Stubbs stood over him, his belly protruding from his coat. You're awful eager to go riding out in the dusky fog. He drew a handkerchief from his vest, and Molly caught a glimpse of the large knife in his belt. You know, Fig, he said, polishing his monocle, I heard that some rich folks sew money right into their clothes to hide it from robbers and brigands and the like. Fig stood up, joining his stout companion. Now that you mention it, I think I've heard that too. Well then, Stubbs said, replacing his monocle, perhaps this merits a more thorough search. He drew the knife from his belt and handed it to Fig, as one might pass a brush to a painter. Fig took the knife, flipping it casually in his large hand. He paced the length of the room, pointing the blades to each person as he passed. Duck, 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 goose. He had stopped at Constance, the woman who was only barely conscious, staring at the man towering over her. Birdie? No, Master Windsor pulled back against the binds. Not her. She's ill. Then she won't put up a fight, Fig said, kneeling. Without a flourish, he removed the blanket from over her body and cut a slice along the side of her mattress. Feathers spilled onto the floor. Tell me when I'm getting warm, he said, and thrust a hand inside her mattress, searching for hidden valuables. Constance recoiled, closing her eyes. Bertrand thrashed like a madman. Get away from her, he screamed. Temper, temper. Stubbs swung a boot, hitting him square in the face. Okay, I'm going to have to stop right there.